When I originally planned to start making videos for 61 Days of Spook, I knew I wanted to play a good amount of retro horror games and give light to some obscure titles. By doing this, I've been able to bring awareness of games that had almost nothing online regarding them, whether the game is good or bad. I've also been able to find new favorites from trying this approach and playing games I grew up with and giving a new view on them that isn't just coming from a childlike mind. While diving into random games I could find online, I came across the game called Illbleed, and I remember hearing just how weird this game is and being told how unique and amazing of an experience you will get from playing it. So why not? I decided I would tackle the game and see what all the hype is about from the small but very dedicated community this game has, and sadly from the title, I felt Illbleed was a huge disappointment. So before I make this review all negative and go into my issues with the game, I do want to start positive and talk about the stuff that I do really love and that I want to praise about the game. Because I do feel there's a lot Illbleed does right, and honestly better than a lot of other horror games. For starters, Illbleed has some of the best and most unique environments I've seen in a long time in a horror game. From the dark and gloomy skies overhead, to the bunch of mutilated or weird characters you can interact with in the hub world, to these weird headstones with eyes. Seeing the neon signs just illuminate everything in the darkness around it, to the assortments of the levels you go through, there's just something about the visuals here that really hits so hard. Then you have the music in the hub area, and it's also very jazzy. And I don't know, man, I feel like I'm going through like a huge jazz phase where a lot of this type of music just hits so hard for me now. Before, I probably wouldn't have gave a shit when I was younger, but now, man, I don't know, there's something about jazz, or what I like to call something about Persona 5 inspired music. Even the UI for menus in the shop or the menus you use yourself have a nice retro vibe. Everything here kind of gives me a weird Las Vegas aesthetic, if that could be an aesthetic, I guess. And this is just a me thing, but I also miss when games had more unique UI elements on screen. While there's a nice feel for UI that try to be liminal, I think I really just missed a lot of the UI on screen that shows a lot of information. It's honestly why I liked Gungrave Gore's UI when I played it. It was very refreshing to see just how much stuff was on screen, while still not being intrusive. I do think the argument can be made that the UI here can be a little bit daunting with how much just stuff is on screen and how much information you have to take in, but I'm a sucker for UIs like this, so I love it. Now, character models, I'll admit, they're kinda ugly, but in a charming way. They look more like Americanized version of anime. Usually you can tell when it's an American artist drawing, especially during this time by the eye placement. They just always look somewhat off, either too close together or very far apart. But for now, let's start the story, and if I have any more praises or critiques or issues, I'll mention them as we go from here. The game starts off with our main protag giving a speech about how her dad used to set up all these horror attractions and pranks to scare her, making her not really scared of anything anymore. And listening to this being said right now, I feel like her dad should be locked up for child abuse. After this speech, we get to meet her friends, and Kevin here is voiced by Sonic's VA from the Adventure series. And even our main character is also voiced by Rouge from SA2. I at first thought it was Leela's VA from Futurama, but yeah, it's not. It is pretty close though. Looking at the VAs here, a lot of them actually had some part in a Sonic game at some point, with Mark Biaggi voicing a character in Illbleed, and he also voices the voice of Vector from Heroes. Bill Corkery, the voice of Espio, is also here, and even Steve Brody, the voice of E102 Gamma. I think it's just cool to see some of the VAs would go on to work on other projects later down the line. Our friends end up telling us that they have tickets to an amusement park called Illbleed, and the prize for beating all the attractions is $100 million. Our main protag declines it and they go anyway, so she goes to look for them a few days later. And that's when the game begins. I think Illbleed does a good job at keeping up the idea of a horror amusement park, as moments in the story will have things happen that pull you back into reality to remember these people you're running into are just part of an act. A very violent and illegal act, but an act nonetheless. It's basically a video game version of that guy who runs a legal torture chamber that no one has ever completed. The only difference is you're not having to sign a 40-page waiver so you can't sue the owner. While in Illbleed, you can just go inside if you have a ticket. Your main goal is to clear the attractions and get money from doing it while finding your friends. The attractions are themed around movies made by the creator of the park that were too horrible for theaters. Once you conquer them all, you can leave the park. There's also 3 different endings you can get, so you will definitely have to play through this multiple times. You'll be using the hub world to make the adventure easier by being able to buy items, upgrade your characters, and bring back characters as they die. I do want to mention before we continue that I did not finish this game because I gave up after the 4th world. And I also don't believe that actually continuing the rest of the game would have somehow magically fixed the issues I had, especially since I was more than halfway done with the game, and I feel like that's enough time to figure out if you're going to like this game or not. With that being said, the purpose of the review is to talk about my experience and why this game as a whole just doesn't work. I will still cover the stuff from the worlds I didn't play, but I do want to mention from here on out, I will be getting into spoiler territory for the game. While I may not like this game, I do still think it's worth trying out, and I want people to go into this blind as they can. And if you got this far into the video and you decided that this is something you want to play, then my best advice is there's a tutorial in the game. Good luck finding it though. As for people who really like this game, I want to have this video as a discussion, as I always love hearing about why someone likes a game I don't. And I don't want people to think that my opinion is more important than yours, as it's not. And if you can find some type of enjoyment from this game that keeps you playing that I couldn't, all power to you. The first attraction I feel is the easiest level to explain why half of the stuff here doesn't work, and I personally feel this shouldn't have been the first stage. The Home Run of Death is about a dad who loses his mind by the death of his son and goes on a rampage with a blowtorch. When you start the level, the game gives you a story explaining the backstory of the world you're going to partake in. These are well presented and add more to the creepiness of everything, and if you don't care about these, you can skip them, but I feel it helps understand these stages more. We learn how his son died as kids upstairs were playing with fire, and as a result the place caught on fire, killing his son and disfiguring the father beyond recognition. Fueled by revenge, he tracked the kids down and burnt them to death with a blowtorch. He now refuses to leave, waiting to kill anyone who comes to the inn. And even though this is the first stage, this is probably where most players are gonna give up. Illbleed's biggest gimmick that makes it different from the other horror games are the traps that it has that are scattered in the levels. The game does a good job at the start showing you these by forcing you to walk into one. While you won't lose any health, your heart rate will go up by 5 to show you that there's consequences to walking into these. Now you're probably looking at the screen and wondering what all these meters are at the top and why I have a brain and a heart rate monitor next to me, and I'll go ahead and explain those now. You see, if you decide to head straight into the inn or try to explore around outside, eventually you will trigger a trap and get hurt. Once you trigger enough traps, you will end up just dying. Most people at this point will give up or be utterly confused about what is even going on. And this is where, if you have a manual for the game or if you just know where the tutorial is in the game, you will soon figure out what you're doing wrong here. I had to look up a let's play as I was confused on what I was supposed to do here. Turns out in each stage there's an item you have to find called the horror monitor. Grabbing this will allow you to set these blue orbs down on traps with the cost of your adrenaline. The brain icon here is what your adrenaline points are. You're supposed to use this while watching the sensors at the top. You have sight, hearing, smell, and sixth sense. These are here to help hint at stuff around you, giving you an idea of what to look for while still keeping it vague. But the game never explains this unless you go to the tutorial area, which is hidden across the map behind the ER. Yes, the game decided it would be a good idea to hide how the game is played behind a building past a cave. Once you're here, now you gotta find the sign on the fence that has the info that you want to know. And look, I'm not saying that the game has to force you to stop for the tutorial. They could easily have just had a different menu where you just learn the tutorial, like in Star Fox 64, where they build the tutorial like it's a whole nother separate game mode. But this, man, it's really dumb. I'm sorry, this is so stupid that they locked it away from people. It just makes no sense to me why they would hide how to play the game literally out in the middle of nowhere across the map. But let's say you found it, learned everything, and then wanted to use all the game's mechanics together. The game then turns into random chance, and the only way to make the game easier is to memorize everything, meaning for a stage to not just beat the living shit out of you, you have to learn where the traps are or get lucky and pick the right spot a trap is at. But if you pick wrong and run out of adrenaline points, then you might as well just reset the game. The only way you can restore these points is by setting the blue orb on traps and getting it right, using items to restore these points, or getting into combat. The combat on one hand is a nice risk versus reward that I think is a good idea to have. You see, the combat feels like shit and is clunky in a good way because remember, these are just high schoolers, so of course they're not going to be able to fight like professionals. The risk versus reward comes up because these fights can either go very smoothly or turn out horribly wrong. While you don't have the choice to encounter these, you do have the choice to run from them. But this is again something the game never tells you, so every time I ran into these fights, I had to fight, but you're supposed to run to the helicopter pad and mash the A button to leave. This isn't perfect because at any point you can still get hit and take damage, and while trying to leave or just encountering these fights, your heart rate can just start going up randomly, and there's nothing you can do about it if you didn't mark it correctly. So while these can be a nice risk versus reward, but if you're already doing poorly, just the mere encounter can be what kills you, or it can shock you enough to have your heart rate go to dangerous levels. In my opinion, it's usually worth doing these fights no matter what, as most enemies can be stun locked, or you can use the dodge that has the most amount of iframes I've ever seen. And if you get lucky looking around the stage, you can find a weapon that you can use to fight. But most enemies can just be cheesed really bad by either just hitting them with your first hit and dodging, or you get lucky and stun lock them. With how combat is built though, this is easier said than done, as most times you'll get hit out of your combo or miss because of wonky camera angles, or the enemy was able to move away. But I still feel, as clunky as the combat is, it still works. It's a choice on you if you want to fight or not at the end of the day, till the game throws that away and decides to force you to fight while not having any way to leave, and I'll go more into that later. You see, the biggest issue with the gameplay loop of going into the area and trying to guess your way through the traps has the gameplay be most of the time you just getting screwed. You're basically forced to replay the stages till you get it right. Since for the first stage, you won't be filled to the brim with items, so there's a good chance you will just be desperately trying to get through, especially if you didn't even know how the game mechanics work, since the game doesn't teach you. I'm also pretty sure that a lot of you would not have the memory to remember every single trap in an area, so most people would probably have to write it down to know where everything's at. And regarding this comment that I got, it's actually pretty sad because if you end up memorizing all the traps, you're actually missing the biggest part of the game, which is seeing the traps. So by playing better, you're actively ruining your experience, which I think is hilarious. But by not playing better, you're making your experience the most tedious grind ever. Now I know someone's going to be like, you just don't want to replay the stages, so that's why you hate it, and that's not the issue. I'm not against replaying of stages to get better at them. It's why Sonic and Majora's Mask end up being people's favorite games, since the more you play over and over, the more familiar you are with the game's mechanics and world. Which gives you the reward of being able to use the game's mechanics and ideas to make more thought out playthroughs, like speedrunning or challenge runs. While in Illbleed's case, I have to ask, what am I learning and mastering by replaying the stage? The only answer I can come up with is the fact I'm learning to just avoid the traps that I only know are there because I either got lucky with the horror monitor before, or I walked into it and wrote it down. At no point do you get better at navigating, fighting, or anything of that matter because the game's main focus with the traps still come down to a dice roll. The best method, or at least what I thought was the best method, was to buy a bunch of items in bulk and push through till you reach the end, but this again feels like a bandage on a horribly infected wound instead of an actual fix to the game. And then I learned the game will also punish you for buying items in bulk, and I didn't realize, but the game will take all your items away at the end of the stage, making you have to rebuy whatever you didn't use. I've seen some people defend this and say, well, it makes it where you plan out for what you really need and don't need, but this is stupid. There's no way unless you played the stage over and over, you will actively know what you really need or don't need, or how long the stage will be. Like take the second stage for instance. Imagine I bought a bunch of items for adrenaline because I was like running out a lot in the first stage, so I didn't want to run out in the second stage. Well, the second stage, you don't even fucking use the horror monitor. The thing is taken away from you from the start. Meaning that all these items I bought for adrenaline recovery are now just wasted because the stage doesn't even need it. I just think the mechanic of losing everything was stupid even when Majora's Mask did it, and that made more sense why it was doing it. While in Illbleed, there's no real reason why my items are being taken. There's no lore reason, there's no in-game reason, there's nothing. They're just being taken so the game can be harder. There are some special items you can pick up to make the game a little easier, like this one that shows you the percent of you getting hit by what could be a trap, or these bombs that will show all the traps in the room you're in, but you have to find these, which again means getting lucky with guessing. These mechanics are why I feel most people will just pick this game up, try the first stage, die a lot, and then quit. And these are my main reasons why I think the first stage is not a good starting stage and should have been the second or third stage. Honestly, it should have probably been one of the final stages. I really think the first stage should have been the second stage personally. Real quick, I want to mention the quality for the rest of the stages here is going to look worse as my recording messed up, so I'm using stream footage. Just wanted to get that out of the way for wondering why the quality just kind of dropped. The rest of the stage has you going through till you reach the basement area and have to drop the items in the right spot, and then you hit the ball to have the encounter with the father. He uses the blowtorch as you quickly learn you can't kill him. At the time, I didn't know how to escape, so I ran around for a while till a random person on Twitch told me what to do. You escape with the helicopter, then are greeted with the maze you have to get through, while the father actively chases you and can teleport if you get too far away. At first, I thought it was multiple models of him in the area, but no, he just teleports. You make it through and find your friend, but before you do, you have to fight the father here, and this time you can damage him. Once you hit him enough with his dead son's bat, the thing next to him explodes and sets him on fire as he runs away. We save our friend as everything is a-okay. So this is something I want to mention, as there's an argument I hear a lot, as you're supposed to take the game slow, since if you rush, the traps will kill you, and you're only hating the game because you tried to rush. Well, the game will decide to punish you if you don't make it here under a certain time limit by having our friend already dead. I believe the time limit is around 50 minutes to an hour. Look, I only made it through because at this point it was around 3 to 4 times of me going through this stage, and I just started to use save state to reload back to like earlier points before I got killed or whatever, because it was a lot faster to do that. I just cannot understand why the game will actively punish you for taking your time here, while having the game's main mechanic be built around taking your time. It's just pure stupidity. The father shows back up and is now giant and tears the house apart as you're desperately trying to get away while he swipes at you, and I forgot how broken the dodge is, so this part was next to impossible at first, but yeah, just dodge it. It makes it so easier once you understand that the dodge is just that broken. I also learned here the game had a jump button, and I didn't even know until someone on Twitch just told me to jump across the platforms here. Once you make it across the lake or whatever this is, you reach a guardhouse and learn that the thing outside is being controlled by this guy in here. Again, I'm gonna give some props to Illbleed. I ended up forgetting that this is all supposed to be fake while playing this. I really thought for a second this was all real. It just shows Illbleed can really pull you in when you're not just being frustrated by random traps. Cause man, I ended up becoming way more invested into the story here than I thought I would ever. So you hit this guy here with the bat and learn he's fake as well, and now you can head back to the game. Okay, thank God. I think it's like my 4th or 5th time having to do this fucking stage. Wait, do I have a card? I think I actually have a card, actually. No. Please don't tell me there's a card I was supposed to grab. Where the 6th sense is flashing, there's something to grab usually. Well, we're gonna have to redo that boss fight again. Oh my fucking God, this game is like putting nails in my eyes. Oh yeah, hopefully you grabbed the random keycard that's on the desk. I was able to find it when I went back, but I couldn't even get the horror monitor to detect it. So yeah, just hopefully you got lucky and saw it before you just left like I did. We make it to the end goal and clear the stage, and then I bought a shit ton of items, not knowing that your items whenever you beat a stage get removed. And during the stage, my heart rate started to decrease randomly, and I still don't know what caused this, but I used an item to restore it luckily. The next stage is about a worm farmer who bought a bunch of worms, as it's now the replacement for meat. As the demand for worms went up, the more worms he bought till the demand dropped massively, making the worm farmer bankrupt. Luckily, he gets an offer to sell his farm, and with no other option he does, but the people who bought his farm screw him over. This is the level called the Revenge of the Queen Worm. The stage should have been the first stage, as it's not overly lined with traps out the ass, giving you a way easier time to get used to all the controls and gameplay mechanics. This was also the only stage where I found the item finder, and this could have been a good introduction to show how your horror monitor's different mechanics work and how it can see item placements. But they don't do that, and the item scanner will just show all the items on the map, and that's because the stage abandons the whole horror monitor right from the start, as these monkey men things, they take it from you. This is why this stage is way better, because you're not just randomly stopping 24/7 to hope you get lucky to select a trap location. But then you learn how heavily the game relies on the horror monitor, as the game becomes so fucking boring to traverse. You end up just having long hallways of nothing, since the only thing the game can do interesting here is have random monsters attack you, and since you don't have the monitor anymore, you end up just having to take the random heart rate increase every single time. So better hope you bought stuff to lower your heart rate a lot. I picked Kevin for this stage, and he's one of the worst characters in the game. Every encounter, he just falls over, and I, for the life of me, have no idea how to get him to get up without just mashing everything on my controller, and I still feel like mashing everything still doesn't work. The items you need to find are all on the furthest part of each hallway, with most leading to dead ends, which just adds more to the tedium, but this is still way better than the tedium of having to use the horror monitor, so I'll take it. This ends up being the first stage too that you can actively miss the area your friend is in and miss him entirely. And I think this is pretty cool, because I like that you're rewarded for going off the beaten path. You find her in the garage and save her and even get back your horror monitor. Even though you get it back, you still don't really use the horror monitor here. I think now I can talk about the mobs in this area. You have the monkey men who can stun lock you easily, and because they're so small, they're hard to hit. It's near impossible to kill them without getting hit. They also have a longer weapon than you, so the hitbox is huge. Then you have the lady with the gun. These are not worth fighting ever, since you know they have a gun. Finally are the worms in this level, and I for once actually felt intimidated by them. They're built to feel like they're unstoppable. They have huge extended hitboxes, and their hurt boxes are hard to hit, as it's on their body and not their head. They can also dig and be hidden for long periods of time while popping up and attacking. The only way you're able to fight them is by getting as close as possible, which runs the risk of you getting hit, since they have a longer reach than you. It makes them come off as, yeah, you can fight these guys, but it's way better you don't. It's like what they did in Subnautica with the Ghost Leviathans. While you can't go out and fight them if you want, and they can die, you're encouraged to not do this at all. Personally, I think the feel the worms give off for this stage is amazing. You soon find the gas station, as the owner won't let you inside. If you try to head to the big open area next to the gas station, you will encounter a giant worm that can't be damaged, so obviously this is not the way to go. But there is a path you can take that requires jumping across these cars. This jump is complete shit, sadly, so get ready to mess this up a lot. If you end up messing up, you have to redo this whole jumping segment, so please don't mess up, you're gonna hate it. Even with save states, it still sucked. You end up finding a baby bottle and bring it back to the gas station employee, and he invites you into the station as it's Rachel's nursing bottle. Once inside the gas station, you go up to this picture as the old man starts to talk to you to read his will. He talks about hanging himself and that he wants you to kill Rachel by burning her with a flamethrower. We now have to go find his body to figure out where the flamethrower is. We get the key and then go through the gate. You walk around and find the dead guy who tells you knock down dummy man. But when I first saw this scene, I couldn't understand him, so I missed out on the puzzle solution because I could not understand what he was saying. We get the memo from the body and learn where the flamethrower is. There's even a diary that tells you Rachel is the worm and how he bought a bunch of worms to farm. Rachel apparently got her size from getting gasoline poured on her, and that's why she's gigantic, because she'd be sipping on the gas. You find a wrench in the building and you gotta use it to knock down all the dummy man billboards, which is what the guy was trying to tell you. But since I couldn't understand him, I just looked up what to do. But yeah, he tells you to knock them down, and this is what it was supposed to be. So if I did understand him, this would have been a really cool puzzle solution. Once you do that, it opens up the dumbest platforming section, which I mentioned before, where it's long, and if you mess up once, you gotta redo it. Once you get the flamethrower, after making it over, you're now ready to fight the boss, and this boss is annoying. It's the same issue with the basic worms, but worse. You barely do any damage with the flamethrower half the time, and the worm never stops digging and then popping out to hit. The flamethrower also has a huge delay if you're standing, but if you're running, she uses it faster. I don't know why. It just goes to show, even with an amazing weapon like a flamethrower, these guys are still a huge threat. We burn her enough to kill her and have her reunite with the old man, and then this scene plays.
Rachel! I've missed you so. You appear to be okay. Oh, that's a relief. At last, we can be together forever. Let's go back to hell. Hey, you, young one. Thank you. I'll never forget your kindness.
I want to shoot myself. It's probably one of the funnier scenes in the game. We then get gas for the car and fill it up and then drive out of there. This should have been the first stage, 100%. There's no reason why this shouldn't have been the first stage. And by the way, Kevin died during the world, and when I tried to revive him, it was going to cost 75k, so I didn't do it. But I do like this mechanic of being able to bring someone back from the dead. It gives the idea of being present of, do I bring back this character or do I stock up on items? And this was before, again, I knew that items were just removed from your inventory after you beat a level, but you know, the point still kind of stands. However, I'm not sure what affects pricing on bringing someone back. Since in Nitro Rad's review, it would have costed him 300k, but here it's less than 100k for me to bring him back. But more often than not, it's probably better to bring people back since the game takes your items away anyways, which I, again, didn't know at the time. Personally, I didn't bring him back because I thought keeping a stock inventory was better, still not knowing at this point you lose all your items. Now it's time for the third stage. It's a sawmill stage with all these lumberjacks running around and wood puppets. Basically, there's an evil tree and it ate some guy who was a loner. Lots of workers kept dying here and no one was sure why. Then boxes started to show up with wood puppets inside and they would terrify the family. People tired of the wood puppets started to take revenge by smashing them, but strangely blood would come out when they did. This is when you come in, and sadly we have to find the horror monitor and actually use it in this stage, and you already know my opinions on this. But thankfully we don't have to use it that much after the halfway point of the stage. And now since we got the other girl, you can notice that we can pick her now, and this is a good time to talk about the characters and all the different stats they have. While Rachel starts off as the all-rounded character, the others you will find excel in a category. With Michelle, she ends up having a lot more adrenaline but dies way faster if she's hit. Kevin still sucks and I don't really think he excels at anything. Then the fourth character you can unlock can hit harder, which, spoiler alert, it's Randy. But you'll learn soon enough, thanks to the upgrades, it's better to just put them towards Rachel as she really doesn't have many weaknesses compared to the other friends. I didn't know about the upgrades while playing, but even if I did, the upgrades are more there to make the tedious parts of the game go by faster, not because you're better at the game or anything, you just have more stats to work with. It's like what Jaws Unleashed does. While upgrading in that game can make Jaws bite harder and take more damage, You aren't really getting better at the game because of the upgrade system, but at least in Jaws you can learn new moves from upgrading even if half of them are useless. Illbleed, upgrading just gets you nothing, you're just able to deal with it better, that's it. You explore the sawmill some more till you run into lumberjacks of the stage. These guys will chase you non-stop and have huge hitboxes on their weapons, but can be killed thankfully. The other enemies you run into are the wood puppets, and these guys are quite the joke enemies as they're almost unable to do anything to hurt you and do more damage to the other wood puppets than they do to you. Which thankfully enemies can hurt each other even if it's not consistent on which enemies can and can't, but boy do I actually love the stage gimmick here. It's the fact that you yourself get turned into a wood puppet, and surprisingly the wood puppets kick ass as the only move you'll ever need is the dash move. Look how many hits I get off while doing this move, it's fucking crazy. I'm not even joking, this form made me have so much fun with the combat, and I don't think that was the intended method here. I think you were supposed to hate using this guy, but I loved fighting with the wood puppets. It made every fight so fun. You soon learn that they're using real humans and de-skinning them to make these puppets, so that's neat. Now this next area is actually really funny, and it's probably one of the funniest areas in the game for me. It's a sign-up place for the attraction, and each side has a pamphlet you can read to see the rules and all the neat details. The wood puppet side even gives you other people's names who are doing this with you, while the lumberjack side gives you notes on the scoring system they all have, and how this attraction is basically played. This section seems to be annoying for a lot of people, as the lumberjacks can just keep coming, and since they're faster, they will usually catch up every time. But personally, I enjoyed kicking their asses and going through the maze. While doing this, I realized how much the game shines when you're getting chased, since it's the only moment where you feel like you're surviving from threats and not magical bullshit like the traps. Personally, for me, these moments reminded me a lot of the Amy stages from SA1. While in that game, these levels always feel out of place since Amy isn't fast like the rest, because if she was, there would be no threat. But Amy's gameplay could have fit perfectly in Illbleed. Think about it. The game uses this approach where the main bad guy or even his lackeys are always on the search for you, trying to find you while you use the environments to your advantage. Taking higher or lower paths for the stage, while using the horror monitor for tracking footprints of the main killer, or even marking him for when he's in the room with you to see him through objects as long as he stays in the same room as you. You could even keep the traps with this in mind, as you can try to mark traps so they can't go off, and these traps could set off alarms or hold you in place. This way, if you did trigger the trap, it would benefit the killer and you get to still see the animation play. This would then give an idea to the killer where you are on the stage and give him time to catch up. You could even use the horror monitor to hack traps to do the same back to the killer, giving you a better idea where he could be. This would have felt way more engaging instead of the whole walk to a hallway and guess till you either memorize and make it through or you die. Even though I mentioned this before, I still think the fact the main gimmick of the game is to have these traps play out, but by playing well, you end up not seeing these ever, so it ends up being really dumb. So why not have these tracks be hackable so you can end up seeing them be done on the monster that's chasing you? That way you still get to see them while playing well. If you still need more convincing, imagine this method but with the first stage. With how the game prompt tells you the dad gets weakened when you have stuff of Jimmy's, but this is complete flavor text as nothing happens by having Jimmy's stuff. But what if it worked this way, where the more items you get of Jimmy's, the easier you are to track by the dad as he has a strong connection to Jimmy's stuff, meaning the more stuff you get, the riskier it is to get through. Then you can reward the player by making the ending part of the stage be easier with the more items that you have of Jimmy, while the risk is the fact that the dad knows where you are more often than not. The only real changes that would have to be made is probably a few placements of the items in the world, but the world is pretty much good to go with this idea. The only stage I feel wouldn't have worked with this in mind too much would have been the worm stage, since you kind of just go through this whole stage without really ever using the horror monitor. But an idea I think they could have done is kind of like what the secret stages in Mario Sunshine do, where they take Flood away from you, which then requires a player to learn how to use the basic platforming to their advantage instead of just relying on Flood. They could have done something like that with the horror monitor being gone, so now you have to rely on your basic moves that you have or something. But they didn't do that, so instead we're left with long hallways of nothing besides worms and grabbing an item at the end of the hallway. But with this whole mechanic thing that I brought in mind, the whole combat encounters would have to be reworked, but these aren't even that good in the first place, since every fight just brings the game to a fucking slog. You could still have the risk versus reward without needing the barrier, just have the enemies now be part of the main mechanic. This is why I love the lumberjack area, because it was one of the few times I felt more in control of what the game was throwing at me, because if I was smart, I could figure out ways to get around where I felt the lumberjacks were going to be, but instead of that, we got the equivalent to a dark and gory dice roll whenever you play this. You end up finding Randy here, and to save him you need to find his brain. You can save him without it, but then he's called Brainless Randy and is useless. The stage also has a lot of nice greenery, and I felt like I was walking through the forest area Majora's Mask. You end up finding the tree boss and beat it, and once done, it's time to move on to the fourth stage. Now the fourth stage I feel has a really interesting environment with the supermarket area, this little Chuck E. Cheese part, and then these giant roaches, but this is also the area with the most bullshit ever. It's why I stopped playing this game because of this area. For starters, I'll mention this part. You get to the supermarket area where you can find a bunch of meat, and you can pick up as many as you can hold. So the puzzle idea here is to feed it to these roaches. Once they eat enough, they leave, or you can say no and then they hit you. These aren't the issue. You see, the problem here is the stage decides to punish you if you picked up too many of these, making you go into this room and then fight every single one you picked up. While I get it, the game is being an asshole by giving you a bunch of free items that heal you a lot and then punishes you for grabbing them. This is such a horrible thing to do to the player, as you will most likely die from this, meaning you're now out of a character that you will have to pay money for to get back, which can be a lot of money as we stated before. If this was just like a little joke section where the enemies could easily be beaten and you're not expected to die here at all, then fine, I would have liked it. But when dying is such a huge punishment and the fact the game is expecting everyone to pick up as much as they can, then it just becomes total bullshit and not really funny. I think no game should ever be set up to make the player die on purpose with a cheap trick that you would have no way of knowing unless the whole game is built around this type of idea. Kinda like the games I Want to Be the Guy or I Want to Be the Boshi. Illbleed, while it may seem like it's built to be a dick with the traps are more there to give you something to do through the stages instead of this being the main focus. The fact the second level has no traps is why I know this is the case. If the main focus was to be a dick with really hard trap placements, why make a level that has no trap placements in them at all? The second reason why I gave up is because now the traps take your money away. At the start, you gain all the prize money and have to make it to the end to keep it. But now it's even more important to memorize everything and make the perfect run because money is very important, especially in a stage that has a setup to make the player die on purpose. Now that traps can take up to 3 to 5k of cash at a single time, it's even worse now to hit a single trap at all. And then combine it with the fact the stage has a lot of traps, some even back to back, it just becomes so annoying to deal with. The final reason I gave up was this section here. The game decides to reuse the worm enemies from the second stage, making no sense why they would even be here at all. These guys were in the second stage for a reason, so how did they get here? Seeing the worms here gave me the same feeling that I get when I see Pyramid Head just put into random shit, even though the meaning behind him is special and only makes sense in the context of the game he's from. Same as how giant mutated worms that were drinking gasoline only makes sense in the second level. You know, the level where giant worms are drinking fucking gasoline? The worms were also made to be unstoppable. Even if they could be killed, you were still almost next to no match for them without a flamethrower. So tell me, why does the game make you fight 3 of them with no way to escape? The fact this fight is basically required to be cheese to win, even if you found a weapon in the stage, is just awful. The worms love staying close together, so good luck not getting hit out of a combo or even dodging, as you may have a lot of iframes. Their attacks have longer active damage frames. They can also appear randomly, making it hard to really track them. They won't damage each other too, so that sucks. And again, they have huge hitboxes and love to retreat as soon as the attack misses, making it impossible sometimes to run up on them. Then the camera is also angled strangely, making you whiff attacks because you're not as close to them as it looks. The cheese strat for this is to hit them with the 3rd hit of your combo, but when your combo can take forever and they love abusing that, good luck doing that. And this is where I just stopped playing. I did not need a second character to die here, even with save states. I just did not care anymore. The rest of the 2 levels end up being a murder mystery where the right answer is the most obvious answer you can think of, and then you have a Toy Story parody where the Woody bootleg toy is trying to get Sexy Doll back, which is a doll with a fat fucking ass. The final boss is also a bootleg Sonic where you attack his rings. This bootleg Sonic here is usually the reason people bring up for why this game is so amazing and why it's unique and quirky, even though this is just like a little thing of the game and isn't that big of a deal. Look, don't get me wrong, this is very interesting that they even were able to get away with this, but this is not the whole game. This thing should not be deciding how good this game is, as I see a lot of people tell me how amazing this game is, and the only reason they ever bring up is this right here. Not the game mechanics, not how the game feels or anything, it's usually, haha, funny bootleg Sonic. Hopefully too, you didn't lose any of your friends along the way of this journey, because the game will end with you sad about not getting your friends back but being rich. If you save them all, you all go on vacation. And if you play through the game as just Rachel and never save any of them, you slowly start to get naked till you're naked with mud covering everything, as the final boss for the ending ends up being your father, and the first thing he does when seeing you is go, "Oh, are those boobs?" and then runs down to greet his own naked daughter. Your reward is seeing a barely legal teenager naked in front of her father. Yes, this is fucking weird. Now I want to talk more about Nitrorad's video. While I do love its content, don't get me wrong, I do feel a lot of the negatives that should have been bigger issues in this review were just kind of brushed away, since a lot of those negatives have unintended workarounds. You see, if you die and have to restart back at the checkpoint, which means you now need to revive that character with money, you can just reset your system and get the character back that died. While yes, this is a nice workaround and it makes it where you don't have to ever buy a character back, this is still not intended and shouldn't be a, well, this part of the game sucks, so do this and now it's good. It's like in Majora's Mask how the Great Bay Temple is known to be shit, but if you know this simple trick where you place a bomb down and then have the explosion push you, it can actually save a lot on the backtracking, making the dungeon feel way faster, and there's even a full skip that doesn't require glitches to get the boss key chest early. While this makes the temple have fun skips and can make it a lot more bearable, this still doesn't fix the problems the temple has, and this shouldn't be considered when addressing the negatives. Again, I love Nitro and his content, but I feel one of his best characteristics is always trying to be more positive when it comes to reviewing and finding the good and bad. But this can also be his greatest weakness, as the really negative stuff I don't feel he hits as hard as he should. Now before someone says, I'm not asking him to become a swearing, angry video game guy. I just feel he brushes over the negatives way too much because he would rather address the positives, which I understand. I also hope this is not coming off like a hate call to him. It's just when his review is the biggest Illbleed review and I'm actively told to check his video out for why Illbleed is great, I feel it's appropriate to consider his review and my review. It would be kind of like if you did a Planet Dob review and you decided to critique my review. I think it would be fair because at this point I'm the only one who reviewed Planet Dob, so why not add my review into the discussion, you know? I also want to bring up some arguments I found when people are defending this game. A lot of people, when asked why they like it, usually will come down to how the game is a parody of a lot of Western horror tropes, and that it has great environments while being very unique on the Dreamcast. While I agree it's the most unique horror game on the Dreamcast, uniqueness doesn't mean it's a good game. This may surprise some of you, but I talked about Planet Dob, and this game is very unique. Even the whole backstory is unique, but if you were to ask me if I felt Planet Dob is a good game, the answer is no. It's not a horrible game per se, but the whole gameplay loop is to find an item to bring it to someone and either get a new item back or get a sound to find bits, then find the bits and leave. It's not all that engaging at times. When it comes to Illbleed, if the only thing you can tell me is the story and areas are the only driving force for why I should play it, then I have to ask myself, why not just watch the cutscenes or a Let's Play on YouTube? What am I really gaining by forcing myself to be curb stomped with every step just to see a 1-minute cutscene or see a few nice set pieces? The game, I will agree, is probably one of the nicest Dreamcast games I've seen in a while, but this isn't a good reason to tell me why I should play it. Another positive I hear a lot is about the humor in the game and how it doesn't take itself seriously. I have a lot of pros and cons for it. On one hand, I like some of the jokes with the billboards or the lumberjack line joke, or this tree boss one and how the boss is broken. But when the game isn't doing creative stuff like that, most of the jokes are targeted towards special needs people, usually doing the stereotypical joke of the dur voice that you hear a lot.
What?
While the first time or whatever, it may be random and funny because the first use of the type of comedy I remember in the game comes out of nowhere, it ends up just being stale after it's used so often. Many moments will have someone just talking like they're not all the way there, as the joke is usually done to the most fucked up looking characters. Then you also have brainless Randy doing the stereotypical special needs phase. If you make it through the stages with him, he will just talk like he's mentally ill, which I mean, I get it, he has no brain. But the point more here is the humor relies heavily on one-note things instead of actively changing up.
Of course, you saved my life.
Ooga, ooga, ooga.
The only other type of humor is the typical, oh, something is wrong, or oh, the player is here, hold on. Kind of like the scene with the tree boss. I know I praise this scene, but they still do this a lot. Lastly, then you have the joke with the father and the naked daughter and how she gets naked the further you continue into the game with her. Like, just fucking weird. I get comedy is subjective, and I'm not saying these jokes can't be well crafted and funny, but when the humor is mostly one-note things like this, I can't see why the humor should be a huge positive for me playing the game. I really am hoping that all my points that I'm trying to bring up are getting across, as I feel like a lot of people are just going to say I don't like hard games, which I don't. If a game is actively curve stopping me, I get real annoyed and don't want to play it. But at the same time, I can still deal with it, especially when I've done things like the Hobbit run, where the first 2 hours of that was literally me waiting for Pokemon to kill themselves because I couldn't do anything. Or the fact that the Elite Four in that took me 4 hours to beat. So I'm not against, really hard stuff like this and, just pushing through till I win. But there is still a limit to where I'm just like, this is just bullshit. There's no way to deal with it. And this was one of those times where I was like, this is just bullshit. Again, I do think Illbleed concept-wise of visiting a horror music part is insane and fun. I just feel when all the game mechanics are actively working against you, or if you're playing well, you're missing out on the biggest appeals of the game. Your game needs a huge rework. Personally, my advice, just watch a Let's Play. This guy probably has the best example I can find, as the guy shows the traps while being informative on the game, so check out Super Great Friend to learn more about this game. But with that was my experience with Illbleed. A flawed game that will still have its fans, but I'm just not one of them. With that being said, happy Halloween, everybody, since it's October 31st, and I hope you all are safe tonight, and have a good night. Also, Nitro Rat, if you somehow see this, I would love to collab. Love you, dude. Keep up the good work.